Okay, so here's where we've left off, and I just want to run through really quick how I've got this thing prepped to go into Keyshot. And so I'm just going to walk you through how I grouped everything. And so I've got basically all of my armor that's hard surface um, in one subtool, and then I've got my leather bits. Everything here will be leather. Here we've got, and these are masked, but let me turn them off. So this is all leather. This is my undersuit, the body, and then the cape and the loincloth. I've got the eyes separate, and then of course you've got the sword, and then all the elements that are not the base of the creature. So the claws, the teeth, and the saddle, and then of course the base of the creature. And then looks like I've got some fingernails, so I'm just going to put those back in, group them with my other fingernails so that they're all in the same place. So the last thing I was going to show you in ZBrush before I start exporting is that this ground plane. I just wanted to walk through really quick how you can get noise on that. And so first of all, it's too small. It's at 482. So I'm going to increase subdivisions on that and get it up to about 500,000. So now that's 500,000. I'll delete my lower. So here's my floor, and I'm going to import this in because I'm going to get a nice shadow cast on it. You can also test everything out by just BPR to kind of see like how the shadow is going to work. So here we go into Lightbox, and then we'll go into noise. There's a lot of different ground plane that you can use, and you can test them out. Like obviously, some of them are going to have to need some editing in the surface. So, but you can play around with different options. Let's see, maybe like a cracked or like some kind of dirt, perhaps. So it does change the color. Again, we're not really working with color, so you can just keep it in black and white. We'll get to that in a second. So once you've got that on there, and really quick, I'm gonna walk back. I know I've mentioned this before, but you do want to have a layer recording so that you can adjust the intensity. So I usually put that on there first. Then I'll add the floor. Now I'm going to go in here to surface, and I can edit. And this is where I can play around with the scale. So you can make it bigger or smaller. Kind of see what that's going to look like. Maybe there's, cracks or dirt or whatever. You can also mix and match some of these. I'm going to turn the intensity, so strength, up, so it's exaggerated, and then I can walk it back in the noise, and then I'm going to say okay. And then I will apply to mesh. It's usually going to inflate. Usually by default it'll inflate a little bit, so yep, a lot. It's almost like marshmallow. So now I can go into the layer, and I can walk this back to something that does work, or I can even go reverse and give it like little sort of mounds and bumps. And then if you like it and you want to see again what the shadows are going to look like when they're cast, you can kind of turn that on. So that's pretty cool. I kind of like it's almost like a snow or something. But anyway, you can play around with that. Say bake all. Also turn everything back to black and white. I'm going to save this. What I've called this is merged because everything is in groups. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to replace. I'm not going to record all of the exports, but just to kind of show you the steps of getting it out of ZBrush into Keyshot. Now, obviously, if you do have the bridge and you want to render directly, you can go in here to external renders and do Keyshot, but you'll have to have the newest Keyshot license for it to bridge over. And if you do want to try that out or pay for it, you can get a student license. Then you can bring your textures that you paint with it. So I'm gonna go into my subtools here, and I usually label, by the way. You can always label by, oops, you can, if you're on a certain layer and you go here to rename, like you could call it armor. I usually don't do the naming, and you want to get out of that, press escape. I don't do the naming until I export. You know, there's some stuff I'd still like to do to this guy, like put the rope, like reins, and put some pieces on the face and stuff. So here's how I export. Right now everything's pretty high because it's all merged. So this is a 5.7 million just for the armor, but we're going to go up here to export, and we'll call this, let's call it mount armor 1, and it's an OBJ, and I'm just going to throw this stuff on the desktop, and then you'll see the export tool come on. You'll start to see this little yellow line come on where it will start exporting. I'm going to stop recording for a second until I get this to work. Okay, so my export for the armor group came out, and I'll just show you that ends up just going right here to the desktop as an OBJ. Obviously, it's not going to give me a preview because it's a little big. Okay, so now I'm going to run through and basically export all of these and get them into OBJs here. They'll be listed, and then we'll use that for exporting. So just again, to kind of run through that, we'll export, and we'll call this mount leather.obj, and save that. It's also a pretty big one. It's at 1.4 million. Okay, so we have now the floor, creature, saddle, swords, cape, body. The ones that have MTLs, those are textures that are embedded, but we don't use the MTLs, just the OBJs. So body, undersuit, leather, and armor. So those are on the desktop ready to go. And at this point, we are now pretty much done with ZBrush. Now we're going to move on to KeyShot to finish the demo. So I'm just going to keep this up in case I need anything out of it. A lot of times I'll have it up when I'm doing this stuff manually, just in case. So let's open up KeyShot, and here we have KeyShot 10. I think this is the one. I've got two KeyShots. One that's an older license that still works. So just a quick run through on KeyShot. So when you open it up, it's pretty basic. You've got over here your environment, your camera, your material, and your scene. Those are kind of the tabs that you'll be using. Your scene is where you will import things into. These are your material lists over here. So you can go through the tabs, but basically, you know, all the types of paint, and there's cloth and stone and different metals, etc. So you might need to spend a little bit of time exploring this stuff. What I do a lot of times is have a combination of different materials that I'll use in Photoshop as adjustment layers to create my own custom result. So first thing that I'll do is go over here to File, Import, and this is where I can start bringing in my OBJs. And since they are all on the desktop, I think they might be a little scattered because this is alphabetical, but since I used mount to start, we'll just start with maybe the floor. But, you know, we'll just go in order here. We'll go armor, we'll go alphabetical. You want to make sure it's in the Y orientation. Also keep position relative to native origin. And the reason you want that clicked is because when they come in from ZBrush, they'll all be in the same space. So let's do import. Usually by default, it imports as a material that's kind of it's like this blue default material. It doesn't really have any lighting assigned to it or anything like that. But once you're in here and you've got it open, it's in tumble by default, so you can kind of tumble around. This is how you'll set your camera up. And then you've got pan, like if you want to just work in X and Y, and then dolly, which is a zoom. You can still just zoom. If you stay in tumble and you hold option, just like in ZBrush, and then as far as pan goes, you would have to have the pan button on. So I usually just keep it in tumble. So first thing I'll do is just import them all. So I'm going to stop recording while I import them all, and then you'll see that they come in here. Right now mount armor is on there, and this is where you can like turn it off or on, or you can break it down into all the different pieces that it's made of. It can get pretty complicated, but I'm just going to try to keep it simple for the sake of rendering for concepts. So I'm going to get all my, I'll just show you one more so you'll, you know, actually maybe before I get into that, I'll just show you how quickly you can assign any material. And it's pretty much in real time, and it's also based off the lighting that's default. So if I go here to this environment button, this is where you can pick your environments. Here's your drop down, so you have interior, outdoor, studio. So right now by default it's a studio light that's turned on right now. So that's kind of like an indoor set of lights. A lot of times I'll use like an interesting outdoor light. Just to show you how quick you can kind of like assign something, you just drag and drop, and then your these are all HDRIs. You can also upload any custom HDRI that you want. If you just want the lighting from the environment but not the actual background, you can go in here to the environment tab, and this is where you can adjust the brightness and the contrast and all that stuff. I usually don't mess with this stuff too much, except for maybe the rotation of the light, so you can basically choose where the sun shines onto your image. Right now the lighting environment is what's set to the background. If you choose color instead, then you can pick whatever color. I usually go with kind of like a neutral gray, mostly because I'm just using it for cutout. Like I'll make alphas and then I'll just put my own backgrounds in. But you can put backgrounds right here through backplate. You can add your own backgrounds if you want to do that. And right now you see that there's a ground shadow turned on. I'll turn that off. That doesn't mean that when I put my own ground in here, I won't get a cast shadow. I'll still get a cast shadow. This is just based on the environment. So I usually kind of get that set up. And then the next thing I'll do after I import everything is over here in camera. This is where you can set you know, basically your focal length. Right now it's at 50 millimeter. Hopefully everyone knows that 35 millimeter is what the human eye sees. So if you start messing with this, it's basically just gonna bring stuff closer to camera like a fisheye. I usually just keep it at 50 until I'm ready to lock in my actual camera. But like a lot of times I don't want perspective on because it kind of warps the design, so I'll actually keep it at 50. So once I get everything imported in, then I'll usually save it out. So just to show you really quick, and also I usually like to just keep everything as like a default material. So I'll just go in here and say like white. I'll usually just use white to kind of as an ambient occlusion. You can kind of start to see what the lighting is going to look like with a white material. But also usually just to kind of test drive everything, I'll keep the environment on some kind of studio lighting. So pull that in there just to keep it you know, similar to kind of the default in ZBrush. Okay, so once you've got that guy in, then I can go and start importing the whole batch. So now I'll go and do the body. Say okay, yes, import. And it will change the camera every time. Now the reason this came in as black is because for whatever reason, probably because there's like textures attached to it, it just comes in as black. So a lot of times just grab this white here and pull it over, and now you've got that, just so you can kind of see what you're doing. Also, if you go into scene, you can see now how you have your body. So I'm going to stop recording and basically just import everything. So hang tight. Okay, so I have now imported everything, as you can see in my scene here. I've got all my pieces, and you can kind of turn them off and on if you want to. Everything's been assigned a white. So if I go into materials, you can see I just have all separate whites. The reason that they're separate is because if it's the same white assigned, then when you change that material, it'll change all the pieces. So I usually hold off to merging them until I make my alpha passes. So now that it's all in here, you can see how you can kind of move it around, and I've already kind of assumed that my pose will be something kind of like 3/4, maybe, I don't know, something like where you see the feet and you see the ground plane. And by the way, this ground, you can make it bigger if you wanted to fill this space. Usually I kind of like cut the horizon in Photoshop, and you'll see some kind of background, and you can kind of paint in whatever you want. So the next steps from here, if you want to just kind of start playing with lighting a little bit so you can kind of see what it's going to look like. I mean, you can experiment with all the different backgrounds. Also, like, kind of based on where the position of the model is will determine, kind of where you have your light source. Like in this case, you're inside, but you've got a bunch of different lights. So you can go into environment and start playing with the rotation of the light. Like if you really want to, bring the light closer to the front, to the side, etc., etc. So this is by default a product design render engine, that they use for like cars and food, and it's basically real world lighting, and it's pretty fast. So I render in real time in here, but you can kind of go through and test out all the different and I've kind of like memorized some of these. Like this kind of is more like a top-down light that's in this garage, and then you can kind of see, you might just find like the perfect lighting that goes with, your character. Now, one thing, there's ways to render in here. It's in here in render, and so you can kind of choose the size and the quality, and then where it goes and what it's called and all that. Normally what I do, so let's just assume I've done my, I've kind of picked, this is what I want my lighting to be, etc., etc. Now you can go into your camera, and right now you're on like a free camera, which means everything is not locked and subject to moving. So a lot of times, this is where you can really spend a lot of time kind of deciding like how dynamic do you want this low angle, kind of what does the creature look like from. So you can really spend a lot of time, honing in your design, especially if you spend a lot of time like on the sculpt. But ultimately you want to kind of find the right camera, and then when you're ready, you're going to come over here and you're going to add a camera. And once you've got it kind of where you want it, in this case I try to use as much real estate as possible, because what I'm going to do for my rendering is just do screen grabs, and I'm going to stack them in Photoshop on top of each other for my compositing. So just try to get, that's one thing I try to do, is like just stick to what I originally had planned, because otherwise I'll probably spend all day sitting in here changing stuff. So once I'm ready for that, I'm going to say okay, and see how it says unsaved. I haven't saved the file yet. So anyway, I'm going to lock my camera. Now I've got a camera. Now if you're going to do multiple views, you can build multiple cameras. so that once you've got all your materials and everything, you can go through and switch to different cameras, and it will, probably like all 3D packages do. So once that's ready, I'm going to save, and camera 1 is in a safe state. Would you like to? So yeah, I want the camera saved in there. I'm going to save it. I don't want to save the package. I just want to save the scene, and it will go into your scenes folder, and I'm just going to call this CCS creature mount V1, and that goes into my scenes, and I've got that saved. And so when you reopen KeyShot, that'll be basically right on the front window. When you open the program, and it'll ask you what you want to open, it'll show you what was open last. And you can see how like the shadows are dropping because it's a quadruped. That's why I was saying like you don't want to put too much detail on the inside of the legs. Okay, so now once you've got that ready, usually the next steps that I'll do is, the first thing I'll want to do is build an alpha. So what I'll do is what's called a clown pass, where I'll basically make all of my different parts a different color with a flat material. Maybe just really quick before I get too far, I want to try to get this a little more dynamic and interesting. I kind of do like the 3/4 view, something like this. Okay, well, once you lock this, you technically can change it, but you're going to give yourself a lot of extra work. So what I'm going to do now is what I call a clown pass. So I'm going to go into my materials, and I'm going to grab the flat color, and I'm going to basically start assigning. And really quick, one thing I wanted to say before we lock the camera is this is also where you can mess with the focal length and get that locked. So if you do want to give it more or less perspective, so sometimes if you notice, if you really drop when I say drop, it means increase the number here on the millimeters for focal length, you can start to kind of push away, and you notice how the ground's coming up. So we're getting, sometimes it's more dynamic that way. And also, makes the creature smaller a little bit. And then obviously when we move this direction, we start getting perspective. So I might actually increase that. And if I do that, I'm going to kind of get a little more out of my real estate by zooming in a little bit, and maybe just a little bit less, something like that. Say okay, now lock my camera. Every time you lock your camera, you're going to want to save. Make sure you save the camera. Okay, so I'm going to go in here to my flat color, and I'm going to start assigning. Now make sure you grab it from the window over here and start assigning. You just basically drag it onto each object. And then what we'll do is we'll go through and double click on each one and color it a different color, just so we make what's called a clown pass. Okay, so notice that the window size is not at full. So if you want to get even more real estate out of your screen, you can actually blow that up, and you notice you've got a little bit more space. But whatever you end up using, once you get your camera locked, and like you don't want to bump this, it needs to stay where it is, so that when you do your screen grabs, because that's the way I'm going to demo the rendering, they'll all line up. You don't want them to be off, so that they're not perfectly stacked. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I just basically double click with the cursor, and you can see all my flat colors in here. So the first one I've got clicked on is my creature, and I can assign it color. So let's just say we'll make this something a red. And obviously if you've used the clown pass, you want the colors to help you select just that particular subtool. So you can kind of go through and say, now I want the cape to maybe be some kind of green. Maybe I'll make the floor maybe like a black, just so it's easy to control. These claws here, we can do maybe like a white. Now we're in the armor, and we can, anyway, you start picking colors, and you want to get colors that are going to be easy to select. The skin color here, maybe we'll do like a purple. And then we've got our saddle, which could be, oh, that's a white already because we've got the teeth and the claws are already kind of assigned with the white. Then we've got our leather bits here, which can be maybe like some kind of orange or something. Okay, and then the undersuit, maybe we can make that maybe like a, so we've got that other blue, so we don't want to, all right, let's do like a purpley. So one thing I just try to avoid is so that like the two colors don't, look too close together. In Photoshop, it'll still know which one to select, but okay. So now I grab my sword and make that, maybe a yellow. And that's kind of competing with the white, so maybe we'll go with like a green. Okay, so that is my clown pass, and I'm going to say, okay, that's the very first thing I'm going to render, or if I don't want to render and I just want to do a screen grab, in Apple computers, it's Shift-Command-3, and you'll hear that little noise it makes, and so it's basically selected all of that. And now that my clown pass is done, I don't need to have separate materials, so usually at this point now, I'll start assigning them all the same material. So there really just ends up being one material, and I'll do render passes of the whole thing in each material, and then I just cut them out separately, individually in Photoshop. Okay, so I'm now going to run through and basically assign one material to each thing, to the whole thing. So I start with this white, and the way to do that is to go in here and grab that same white and just assign it to everything. And now I basically wait for it to do what I call cooking. So basically if you wait anywhere from like 1 minute to 5 minutes, this will just keep rendering and getting more and more detailed. But because I'm going to be compositing all this stuff in Photoshop, I don't really need a ton of rendering, and also going to do some photo bashing and some paint over. So I'm really just going to get my basic renders. So kind of go through and pick what materials I want. And this is where, if you did have a game plan of materials and colors and whatnot, you can go through and kind of pick, and I can just kind of show you if, for example, I had an armor that was going to be like a gold. This is where I could, essentially assign the gold. That's a little bit crazy and too bright, but this is where you can get some really cool materials. But like, let's say I wanted to just isolate some of these armor bits and make them gold. This is where I can, assign, maybe I like this one called gunmetal, which is like a cool black. Now I'm also not locked in 100% to my lighting scenario just yet, so I can still play around with different environments. So feel free to play around with the different environments. There's also the sun and sky, the outdoor ones, which they're a little more intense because they're like sunlight, but you'll get a lot brighter lighting scenarios. So you can go through and kind of play with those, and you can also go into the environment here and you can rotate the light from where it is on anything. So I'm going to pick a light, and then what I'm going to do is run through all my material passes. And just to give you an example of, once I have that material pass ready, again, I'm going to do a render with Shift Command 3. You hear that little noise. And what I'll do is I'll collapse it with the yellow just so it shrinks. And you can see they're going to get placed up here on my desktop by default, but I basically have, what I call my clown pass, and then you also have like a white. So what you'll end up with is about, depending on how many materials you do, about 15 to 10 different material passes, however many you want to do, and then once they're all stacked, here in the desktop, then I'll bring them into Photoshop and stack them and start compositing. So I'm going to go through my keyshot and basically render out 15-ish materials, and I'm going to stop recording for a second, but I'll come back and do some more of that when I get to some material renders. Okay, so I'm going to walk through some of these materials like I was saying. So I've got the white, I've let this cook long enough, so I'm going to do a grab of that. And then I'm going to come in here and, actually before I get too far, I might choose a different lighting scenario. So I'm going to play around a little bit with different lighting. So you can kind of experiment and kind of see if there's something that you like. Also, there's, that one's kind of interesting. Has some cool cast shadows. I do like that. I do like the cast shadows. And I can also play around with interior lights a little bit and see if I might find something. That one's pretty good. I like the top-down lighting. It's a little flat, so I'm going to undo that. That might be a little more successful. So anyway, play around and see if you can't find the light that you like. I think I might just actually keep that one. It's a little warmer than the one that I had from before, and the ground is getting pretty lit, but yeah. Okay, so now that I've got that, I've got my camera locked. I think I've got an environment that I like, so I'm going to say save. And now I'm going to go, like these last two white materials I'm going to get rid of. So I've basically just got my my alpha, and now I'm going to go in and start making material passes. So I think this white is probably at a point that should be okay. So I'm going to grab that, and now I can go in and start again, like let's see what gunmetal looks like. That's pretty cool. So I'm going to let that cook, and then as that's cooking, I'm going to maybe go and find sometimes like gold, like maybe if you just want to do little accents. You have to think of the materials as like, not as a whole. You're not rendering this whole thing as gold, but you might just have little gold accents carved into the white. So you can kind of play around with that. Obviously, this is a shinier material, so you start getting these like really specular highlight, these bright highlights that might not necessarily be exactly what you want, but there's some areas in here that you might like this black metal, so maybe just keep that as an option. I'm gonna put this gold in here. It's a little intense. That one's a little better, but I might use this material to get some just accents on some of the pieces. So now as that's cooking, I'll kind of start looking for my next material, which there's also cloth, and I was thinking for like this undersuit and like the saddle and stuff, I might actually let's see if I can find something cloth and leather. I might use leather for the leather. There's also these cloth weave that I might use for like some of this undersuit. But yeah, let that cook for a second, and So you can think about different lighting scenarios. You can also plug in incandescence. So you could build a light that you can import into here and assign an incandescence to it, and you'll get little rim lights. One thing I'll do is once I'm done with all my rendering, I'll go and create a new environment where maybe I have like a sun that's shining to the side and go and put a rim light on it. And then I can composite the rim light on top of it in Photoshop. And I'll actually show you how to do that. So I'm done with the gold. And now I want to maybe try leather out. Now don't worry if it gets too dark. There is ways you can adjust the environment lighting by increasing brightness, like for certain materials, but I try to just keep it all at like a default. You can also do quite a bit of adjustment in Photoshop, like if you want the leather to be brighter, etc. So maybe I'll play around with like a dark leather, then I'll probably do like a cloth weave, which gives it a pretty cool kind of texture. Now, if you do want to get into adjusting any of the materials, you can go in here and double click on that. And you can see how these default materials do have built-in texture, like a diffuse and a bump map and a specular. So let's say you wanted to, grab your own type of cloth. You can import a texture. Technically, you just double click on it. Oops. Now I've started over my let's see. So I'm not going to do it to this one just because I just want to keep it as is and get a leather pass really quick. And then once I finish this pass, I can try it on a different material. But yeah, so obviously kind of from where my camera is, you're not getting a lot of detail. But if you were to like zoom in and like want like a shot where you actually see that it's leather, you can get a lot more detail. So I'm going to keep that one, and just really quick to show you how you can go in. So I'd grab like a white, put the white back on there, double click on the white, and this is where you can go in here to texture and no texture loaded. So if you click on, double click on that, this is where you can go and find textures that you've uploaded that you could technically put. And just to give you an example, you can like pop that in. Obviously, you need some work, so you can go in and control, all the different aspects of that if you want to shrink it down or whatever. But so you can go in and start putting in your textures. And this is where, if you do somehow get your poly paint out of ZBrush as an MTL file, I think you can bring it in here, and you can also make a bump version of it. So say you were to put that same texture in the bump, that'll add the bump effect to it. So you can go in and start plugging in textures that way if you wanted to. It's kind of an interesting green grass pattern. Make that a little bigger. Anyway, you can play around with all that stuff, but this is where you can go and build some pretty cool effects like moss and whatnot. And maybe I do have some areas on the creature where I like this green stuff and I want to keep it. Can almost use it as a base and then put an ambient occlusion over it. So yeah, I'll just grab that just for fun. Okay, and now I'm going to go back to my cloth and grab like a cloth weave, and this is where I can get some interesting material passes. So what I'm going to do is just go through some different materials and do all my renders. I don't need to record all that, and then I'll end up with all my renders over here, and I'll be able to go and stack them inside Photoshop and use this clown pass to kind of isolate whatever I'm working on and start painting stuff out and comping it all together in Photoshop. So that will be the next video. All right. Thanks, guys.